may be seated. Doctor, you're still under oath, taken earlier. Counsel, may we proceed?
Sorry, Justice Masaneke, a fan has been kindly provided to assist with the temperature levels, but I think it's blowing warm air. And I wonder if I may ask one of the attendants to either switch it off or make it colder.
Yes, it looks quite sophisticated. At the top it has electronic display, so it should be possible to make it colder. Shall we take our chances for a while, or rather switch it off?
We'll see how it goes. Dr. Talatala, before the adjournment, we were at page 3574 of file 11, which you confirmed to be the letter that you and your colleagues wrote to several government officials, and you mentioned their names and their designation. I'd like to go through some of the aspects of this letter. You begin the letter by saying in the first paragraph, in the middle of the first paragraph, we are committed to working with the Department of Health in providing mental health.
I think switch it off.
Sorry, it's too hot.
Yeah, it is hot. Just switch it off.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, let me just repeat. We are
Why don't we
committed.
at least have the door at the back open? Get some ventilation, natural ventilation. Yeah, I just want the people not to speak out there. Okay, Counsel.
So in the middle of the first paragraph, you say, we are committed to working with the Department of Health and providing mental health care to the province and in the implementation of the National Mental Health Policy Framework and Strategic Plan 2013 to 2020. Our comments below are in the context of this commitment. Can you explain why? It's clear to me that you work with the department. Well, maybe you can confirm that. You spoke about regular meetings with the department. Why did you feel the need to stress the importance and your commitment to a partnership?
I would like to first confirm that we actually do work with the Department of Health. In fact, we are trained by the Department of Health. We are, the doctors are paid for by the Department of Health, and when they qualify, they actually work for the Department of Health, even though later on they may go to private practice. Amongst the board of the Society of Psychiatrists, some of the board members, if not the majority, actually are state employees. So we work with the government as employees of the state to deliver on its mandate of providing healthcare to the community. We're also aware that we are the experts in psychiatry. We therefore have that knowledge that the department may need in order that it can get some assistance on how to implement its policies. So I think we were recommitting ourselves to people we already work with. At the time we wrote the letter, we already, as stated earlier on, we already have had several meetings, even projects together. I had been asked to give talks on behalf of in a government-organized meeting. So we didn't see each other. We saw each other as important partners. We didn't see each other as adversaries. We are not on opposite sides. We thought we had the same common vision for health in South Africa.
And some of the signatories to this letter, you say, are state employees.
Yes, if not them.
Certainly, there are members of the the society
Yes.
that are employed by the state. It's not only private practitioners, is it?
I think in the list at the time, I was the only one who was in that list of the signatories. But I must also bring it that even I, as the private psychiatrist, I was also working for the state. I had, not at the time, but I had worked for the state on a sessional basis from 2006 to 2013 at Stekfontein Hospital.
You then go on in the next paragraph to say, primarily, we are worried that the reduction of beds at Life Esidimeni will have unintended, costly, negative consequences. And then you quote from the, what you call the NMHPF, that's the policy framework, the national policy. And the quote reads as follows: deinstitutionalization has progressed at a rapid rate in South Africa without the necessary development of community-based services. This has led to a high number of homeless mentally ill, people living with mental illness in prisons, and revolving door patterns of care. Is this is a direct quote from the policy, or is this your opinion on deinstitutionalization?
It is a direct quote from the policy framework, and it's on page 16 of the policy framework.
So at the time that the Marathon project was taking place, or was about to take place, there had already been, the process of deinstitutionalization had begun. Maybe not in relation to the Life Esidimeni facilities, but it had begun in some other form.
Yes. If I were to put it in context, these are probably the last few patients that were still in institution. The deinstitutionalization has been going on post-1994. And at the time of the policy, when the policy was being written, we're commenting on, the policy is commenting on the experience we've had already prior to 2013. So the policy is telling us, government and all stakeholders in mental health, that already what we've done before 2013 has moved too rapidly, and it has resulted in those consequences. So that's what the policy thought of at the time it was being drafted. And I must also add that at the time we were writing this letter, we're not under the impression that we're warning the government not based on the impression of what they've actually done. We were warning them, assuming that they will reduce the number of patients, send them to the NGOs that we know of, that we've sent patients to, that we're aware of. So the warning was not, obviously I'm sure we would have had come with an extreme warning if we knew that the patients were going to be discharged in the manner that they were discharged. So we had the warning even at the time that we assumed that the government will discharge the patients to our well-known NGOs.
So just for clarity, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that, well, first of all, according to the policy, it says that there's been rapid deinstitutionalization. This is already a problem. Second, you're saying that you were under the impression that the transfer was going to take place to NGOs that you are aware of, and we'll come back to that. And the second is that it would be conducted in a particular manner, the transfer.
Yes.
So on that assumption, you meaning that it would be, the transfer would take place according to what some protocols, and that they would be placed in NGOs that were capable of taking care of mental health care users?
That's correct. Either they would be placed in the NGOs that we are, because we have been disinstitutionalizing. As psychiatrists and doctors, we've been part of the process. So we had assumed that they would then discharge the patients either to the established NGOs, or I don't think it was a given to us. It wasn't even an assumption. It was a given to us that the patients would be discharged either to the established NGOs or the patients would be discharged home. So that was the given that we're dealing
So there
with.
are established NGOs. Are you saying there are established NGOs that would be capable of providing appropriate care for mental health care users?
There are established NGOs, but we didn't think, and I still don't think, that they would be able to cope with the types of patients that were going to be discharged. I'm saying this because in the years 2006 to 2013, when I worked at Stekfontein, I was in charge of the patients with what I would call them treatment-resistant or refractory patients. By that I mean these, if I to just comment, give some more detail. Stekfontein Hospital between 2006 and 2013 had 3 acute wards for mentally ill patients who are admitted as involuntary patients. So these patients are severely mentally ill, they're admitted as involuntary. So Stekfontein had 3 wards. The patients will be treated by the psychiatrists, psychologists, and everyone in those wards, and they will be considered for discharge once they are well. But there will be a number of patients who will not get well from those psychiatrists, and then they'll be transferred to my ward, which was Ward 5, and then it was changed to Ward 9. Then my responsibility with my MDT was to treat and try all kinds of treatment with my multidisciplinary team, the psychologists that were working, our supervising, and the doctors and nurses. So our job was to treat this patient as much as is possible and for as long as is possible with whatever combination of medications. So after we've treated them, then we'll make a determination whether these patients must go home, must go to an NGO, or must go to Life Esidimeni. Those who do well will meet with families, will send them home. Those who are, I would say, not so okay to go home, then we'll send them to NGOs. It will be the most severe patient that we'll send to Life Esidimeni. Or alternatively, it will be a patient whom we have sent to NGOs, because NGOs were allowed to take these patients and return them to us if they can't cope with them. So if we send the patient to an NGO, then the NGO could return the patient to us, and we could then consider placement at Life Esidimeni, because these are patients who are still having ongoing symptoms that were failed, the medication had failed to treat, and not out of lack of medication, but with all the science and medication that is available.
So are you able to name some of the NGOs that you consider to be the established NGOs?
If I can think of them off my head, Talisman, Tandanani, I can think of those 2 off my head.
Were any of the Life Esidimeni patients transferred to those NGOs, in your knowledge?
In my knowledge, no. And it's something I had brought in one of the meetings with the National Mental Health Directorate. In that, in the years that I worked at Stekfontein, it was difficult to find an NGO to take our patients. I asked the question, where are you going to find these NGOs? But I never really got an answer where they were going to get NGOs. And at the time, my given was we're going to get an NGO like the established NGOs that we have. And we know that the NGOs, even at the time, were almost close to, they didn't have beds, actually.
So you raise these concerns. You say that in the letter, precisely what you're saying now, community mental health services, which I imagine would include NGOs, is that correct?
Yes.
Were insufficiently developed to cope with the resulting increased mental health care demands. Is that what you're talking about now when you say that there was not sufficient supply of community-based care?
Even beyond that, it's not the community-based mental health care services. It's not yet established as envisaged by the policy.
It's not yet established.
Established as envisaged by the policy, even today. Because if we're going to discharge patients from institutions, the policy itself says that we mustn't close the institutions before we develop community-based mental health services. That should include, firstly, integrated mental health care with primary health care in the communities. That will include residential care, NGOs, so that even though you may have NGOs, you don't want the NGOs to absorb patients and not know where to take them when they relapse. So it's not just the NGOs only, it's also the primary healthcare clinic that is integrated. It's also a residential care, sort of halfway houses. And it's a good policy because you want the patients to be treated closer to their communities, not in institutions that are far.
You say that in addition you were concerned about the rising number of mentally ill people in prison. How is that relevant to this deinstitutionalization process?
Well, and everyone knows in the mental health, including the government, that the Provincial Department of Health was aware of it, still aware of it even today. That firstly, if I had to just paint the picture a little bit, we've got our acute facilities, like Baragwanath Hospital, Helen Joseph, Charlotte Maxeke. Then we've got, I'm just naming a few, we've got our bigger institutions like Stekfontein and Vescopis and Tara Hospital. We are all aware that they are full. So if you then close, because Life Esidimeni is at the end, if you then close Life Esidimeni, Charlotte Maxeke and Baragwanath Hospital are not going to have a place, and Stekfontein, to discharge the severely ill patients who are not responding to treatment. So you limit that, and what's then going to happen? Either they're going to keep the patients longer. I'm not talking even about the forensic one, just the normal patient. It means they will have to then keep the patients longer in the hospital because they have nowhere. They don't have a place, a Life Esidimeni or that kind of a facility where the patient can stay for 2 years, 3 years. So then they will have to do that at Charlotte Maxeke or Joburg or Baragwanath Hospital, and then that will clog the system. In addition to that, remember that we already had a challenge with Stekfontein Hospital and Vescopis in terms of the forensic observation. The National Prosecution, they had already raised the demand of justice, they had already, at some level, raised concerns about that there are patients who are waiting for observation. So there's a growing waiting list.
You're talking about
not patient, the accused.
The accused.
The accused, yes. They are awaiting trial accused who are alleged that to have committed offense because of mental illness. There's already a waiting list to get to Stekfontein, which already...
Those are patients who require forensic assessment.
Assessments, yeah.
And a report under the
Yes.
CPA Criminal Procedure Act to be forwarded to a court.
Yes, Justice.
To assess their criminal responsibility.
Yes, Justice.
You're saying there's a waiting list?
There's already, the waiting list had been growing at the time I wrote the letter. It had been growing instead of reducing. That's one arm of the forensic patients. But the other arm of the forensic patients is that sorry, I'm calling them as forensic patients. They're not patients yet, the ones who are going to go for observation. But now when they are found not fit to stand trial, they're supposed to immediately go to Stekfontein for treatment. But that is not happening because we don't have beds. So patients wait in prisons as state patients. So when you already have a system...
Do they get care, any sort of mental health care while they are in prison?
They could get... the Correctional Services does hire psychiatrists to have a look at them, but it is not even close to ideal care to treat mentally ill people in prisons with other prisoners in there. So we already had a system that was already in a crisis because we were already treating people in a inhumane, or at least their human rights were already affected. The fact that you could be a state patient but you're going to be kept in prison, that is already a problem. So when you've got a system that is like that, we did not think that it is a correct thing to then close the chronic beds, because then we're going to have a clogging up of the system in all those arms. There's several other arms that the province was aware of.
Tell me a little more about Life Esidimeni. I just want to check on my understanding. It is a facility for chronic mental health care users, is it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
In other words, what does that mean? The patients there ordinarily would be ideally looked after when institutionalized? Is that what it means?
In our current circumstances, that's the best place for them.
And the NGOs that already existed, and you've mentioned two, that you say appear to be operating well, Talisman and Tandanani. Were they taking on chronic patients or acute patients, as you sometimes call them?
Both the NGOs and Life Esidimeni would not take acute patients. They will take chronic patients. But it depends on the severity of their illness.
Tell me the difference between acute and chronic.
It depends on the illness that you have. But if I were to give a crude way of differentiating, a patient, for instance, with schizophrenia may have an episode of illness where they are severely ill with disorganized behavior, behaving in a way that doesn't fit with the community, hearing voices, delusions, and they may get admitted after several steps to an acute facility, let's say Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, where an attempt will be made to treat them and get that episode treated. But that patient may either not respond to treatment, or Baragwanath may not cope with the illness, and that patient may end up at Sterkfontein Hospital. Or if kept at Baragwanath, the patient stays for several months at Baragwanath Hospital. Let's just take the arm where the patient went to Sterkfontein Hospital. Then the patient will go to those wards of mine I talked about, 3 wards, and they may end up in that ward of mine. So this is like several months. It can even go to years. Then that patient, when we've tried everything, will be the current patient that will go to Life Esidimeni.
Well, let me try that shortcut. So Life Esidimeni would then take what? Would take chronic patients.
Yes.
That would require constant and continuous care.
Yes.
And what is the desirability of patients like that to be given out to NGOs, to be discharged to NGOs?
At all these levels, our ultimate goal is to discharge the patient back to their family. So that's the ultimate goal, even at Life Esidimeni. So if NGOs themselves, we are hoping that the NGOs should not be taking the patients to keep them indefinitely. The NGOs would provide some psychosocial interventions that will reintegrate the patient back to family. But it may take longer than, and if that is done at Baragwanath Hospital, that would actually block the beds. If that were to be done at Sterkfontein, it will actually block the beds. And also, the NGO is not as, it doesn't look like a hospital. It's not a hospital, if I'm explaining myself well. Like if this reintegration back to the community would be ideally be done in an NGO or in a residential facility closer to home than doing it in a hospital, which is Sterkfontein, which is far removed, and that is a treatment model that is for hospital patients. I mean, one of the simple things would be to meet the family. Let's assume, which would happen at Sterkfontein, the community, and they've done that with my patients in the past. The community have someone who's ill. They hear that the patient is at Sterkfontein Hospital. They write a petition to the treating doctors at Sterkfontein that please don't discharge that person ever back to us because it's caused too much harm. Now, it is difficult to call those families if they are from Heidelberg, if you're at Sterkfontein, even the family. So the reintegration won't be easier. The reintegration will be easier if it was done at an NGO that is closer to the community or some residential facility closer to the community. So Sterkfontein hospitals are hospitals that are not as equipped to reintegrate as NGOs would be.
When you speak about discharge from Sterkfontein to Life Esidimeni, what do you mean by discharge? Does it mean that they're now well and no longer, so they're in need of some chronic care? What does it mean for their treatment? When you say discharge, what do you mean by it?
The word discharge itself has nothing to do what is going to happen to the patient or how the patient looks like. Unlike in layman's language, you would think that discharge, it means you're well, we should go home. So discharge has to do with the person who's treating the patient. You are under my care, I'm Stekfontein, I'm discharging you because I think I've done what I should do for you. It has nothing to do with whether you're well or not, or you're going home. So in medicine, we do discharge people to a hospice, we do discharge people to another hospital to go and have a heart transplant. So it has nothing to do with what's going to happen to you. So the patients that went to Life Esidimeni, yes, they would have been discharged to Stekfontein because Stekfontein's hospital says we are done with you. From Stekfontein, because Stekfontein says we are done with you. But in fact, the ones that I sent to Life Esidimeni were still ill enough to require further inpatient care.
So they would be discharged into the care of somebody else.
To the care of Life Esidimeni.
We'll come back to all of that. I don't want to distract from where we are now, the letter. We need to just to go through this. On page 3575, you set out 5 concerns that you say to the addressees that you want to highlight, the following 5 concerns. Can you very briefly take us through these concerns and why you felt that you had to highlight these particular concerns?
Okay. Okay. The first one is talking about the severity of the illness. It's actually commenting on the care that is provided at Life Esidimeni and why we thought that those patients need that kind of care. It's because of the severity of their illness, and at the time we were of the opinion that they wouldn't be suitable to be discharged. I think that's what the first one talks to.
Continue.
The second one is talking about the level of care at NGOs and versus the level of care at Life Esidimeni. The first line already says that the community-based residential facilities currently available are not equivalent to the Life Esidimeni care centers in staffing or equipment.
Pause there for a moment. Those NGOs that you're referring to, are they the NGOs that are involved in this marathon project? Are they the NGOs?
You mean the ones we're commenting about here?
Yes.
We're talking about the licensed NGOs that we had at the time.
Right.
Yeah, we're not talking about, we would not have known the unlicensed and unestablished ones.
Okay.
But that comment was talking about the NGOs that are currently available were available in the community, licensed, because they are in the community. The NGOs are not established by psychologists or psychiatrists or occupational therapists. They are established by lay people in the community who have an interest in mental health. And we were of the opinion that the level of care provided by Life Esidimeni and the needs of the patients at Life Esidimeni is too high. It
would not be met by those NGOs.
It would not be met by the NGOs.
And even those NGOs that were licensed and that you were familiar with?
Yes.
In paragraph 2, what does COJ refer to?
City of Johannesburg.
Continue. So that's the thrust of your point in 2, and there's some detail there which supports and substantiates your point.
Yes, it also highlights that they are 95%, at the time they were 95% occupied.
There were only 8 or 9 beds which were 95% occupied. And we know now at the time in Life Esidimeni there were nearly 1,700 patients.
Yes.
And then your third concern?
Yeah, I think here we were talking about actually the the type of the facilities that we have. There is most of the daycare facilities in Southern Gauteng are for intellectually disabled children. There are 5 for mental health care users in the city of Johannesburg, and the West Rand has 1. There are none in City or Ekurhuleni. People with severe mental illness living at home are very often left unattended and unoccupied during the day. This increases the risk of substance use and non-adherence to treatment. Here, we were talking now not about the NGOs, but about day facilities, if this were to be established. And we're trying to highlight that we don't have day facilities. And in the biggest regions of Gauteng, of Southern Gauteng, which is Ekurhuleni, with even less resources than city of Johannesburg, you don't even have a facility for day facilities. So I think here we're trying to highlight that whilst everyone will suffer, but Ekurhuleni and Esidimeni will be in the worst position.
And your fourth concern, can you take us through that? And I understand it to be related to what you were talking about earlier, about forensic mental health care users, meaning awaiting trial detainees.
Yes, I think we're talking to that, but we're also talking about the staffing. Can I just read it here? Sure. With primary care re-engineering in the district clinics, there are no longer any social workers or occupational therapists attached to the district special mental health clinics, which are also short-staffed of doctors. So we're talking to, because if you're going to discharge these patients, you're going to need them to go to be attended at the clinics, and the clinics themselves didn't have those facilities. The specialist status of the current secondary level outpatient services remains uncertain and without a specialist multidisciplinary team. As indicated by the rising numbers of forensic mental health care users, they are already inadequate for the specialist needs of the severely mentally ill. The internal district psychiatric specialist teams in the Gauteng Department of Health operational plan have not yet been rolled out. If these patients were going to be discharged from Life Esidimeni or even from any other chronic facility to the community, we needed to have proper staffing to receive them. Because of the severity of the illness, remember, these are the patients who will be on combination treatment that I would have put at Stekfontein Hospital. You would not then expect the nurse to be adequately trained to look after even just the medication, the prescription. So we needed, never mind that we also needed psychologists and occupational therapists. So before we move severely mentally ill patients to the community, we needed to have at least some level of staffing, and that is in the policy.
And there wasn't that level of staffing available?
Our experience working in the community, that was not available.
And your fifth concern?
That one, I think it speaks to the shortage of beds in general. Whilst we are closing Life Esidimeni, there's already a shortage of acute beds. I'm just going to explain what acute beds are again. The beds at Charlotte Maxeke, Helen Joseph, Chris and Parakwanath. There's already a shortage of those beds. There's already a shortage of beds even in the district hospitals. So that is the number we're talking about, that 1,200. So to close the chronic beds would then put pressure on those acute beds that are already 1,200 short at the time of writing the letter.
What is NMHPF?
NMHPF is the National Mental Health Policy Framework.
Thank you.
So you raise all these concerns. You conclude your letter by saying, we urge the MEC for Health and the Gauteng Department of Health to reconsider the decision to cut long-term care and instead direct efforts to further develop the CMHS. Is that Community Mental Health Services?
That's correct.
And your last sentence is, we sincerely hope that by working together, the ultimate goals of this policy may be achieved. Did you get a response to this letter?
We never got a response, Council.
From any of the officials to whom it was sent, or are you only referring to the former MEC?
No, we never got a letter back from any of the people who wrote to and copied. Some of them we may have talked about it later on, but it was not a direct response to our letter.
So you received no response. Do you have any understanding as to why you would, if you have been cooperating, why did you not get a response from any of those officials? Do you have any idea?
My thing to it is that the department had already made up its mind that it's going to close the facilities, and we're actually being a nuisance to raise those concerns.
So what did you do then when there was no response? It's now June 2015. The move is imminent. The transfer is imminent. What was the next step, if any, that SASOP took?
Are you asking before the announcement by the MEC? Because the MEC then announced officially in October.
Whatever it was, whether it was before or after.
Okay. Before the official announcement, there was no specific action that is on record. Obviously, we continue to engage quietly and unofficially until the MEC then announced in October that the contract had been terminated. That is where then we wrote a second letter requesting a meeting with the MEC.
When did you write this letter?
It was in October. It should be.
October 2015.
Just after she made the announcement.
I believe the letter is attached
It should be.
to your affidavit, if I can just find it.
Is it page 3581?
That's it, 3581. Thank you, Justice. So, 3581, are you at that page?
Yes, that's correct.
October 2015 is a letter that's addressed to the former MEC, and then also to the other addressees who were on the original, in the first letter rather. Mr. Pagati, Dr. Salabano, Dr. Lebete, Dr. Mazamisa, Ms. Lerutla, Mr. Mosinochi, and Dr. Manamela. Can you tell us, well, let's first look at what the content of the letter is. Is this, my understanding, it's a letter requesting a meeting?
Yes, Council, it was a letter requesting a meeting after the announcement by the MEC.
And it again repeats your concern. You don't go into detail this time, but you say we are deeply concerned.
Yes, we said so, and we referred the MEC to our previous communication.
And did you get a response to this letter?
No, we never got a response, Council.
Not from any of the addressees of this letter? Or was it that you just didn't get a response from the former MEC?
We never got a response from the MEC or from any of the addressees. As I say, in the passages, I would still try and whisper to some of them and say, this is going to be a problem. But not in an official meeting and not official communication to us.
So I see that the addressees, it's apart from the provincial department, you also address it to the national department. The Director of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, National Department of Health.
Yes, Council, both letters were to both the Provincial Mental Health Directorate and National Mental Health Directorate. Because whilst we were engaging with the Provincial Directorate of Health, we also were in engagement in several meetings with the National Department of Health, National Mental Health Directorate, on several other issues, not just on the...
Hoping that the National Department of Health would intervene, would take some steps to address the concern?
Well, we were hoping that the National Department of Health, as probably the custodian of the National Mental Health Policy Framework, will go and raise concerns with the Provincial Department of Health, and hope we're worried about the consequences of the discharge of these discharges, and we did not only think that they will have an impact on just the province. We thought that they will have an impact nationally, and also we are hoping that the National Department of Health would assist us into showing the province how much it's deviating from the policy.
Did you get any assistance from the National Department of Health?
Not at that stage, not until 2016, when we presented to the Ministerial Advisory Committee.
When in 2016 was
August 2016.
August 2016. So this was October 2015. You don't get a response. What do you do next?
We then started speaking with other stakeholders in mental health, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, the South African Mental Health Federation, and the patients, the family members. We tried to gather some kind of support so that we could speak with, they could support us in speaking. In fact, also make the families aware of what was going on, because we also we see our role as psychiatrists, as people who have this knowledge, but we cannot keep it to ourselves only, or we cannot only advise one stakeholder in mental health. So we cannot say, to treat schizophrenia, you need antipsychotics, you only tell government. We have to tell government, we have to tell the patients, we have to tell the patients' families, and all stakeholders involved, including business and everyone, because the impact of not doing the right thing will affect all of them. So our responsibility is not only to the patients, the families, or to the governments. Our responsibility is to share what we know with all stakeholders. So we then started speaking with our partners in mental health, and our view was that if the government thinks of us so badly that we are not partners, at the very least, there should be an appointment of a curator to look after the interests of the patient. We could then go and speak with the curator and raise our concerns, and then the curator would then be the one who would then adjudicate on what is wrong or right. If we look, our image is so bad to government. That's what we engaged on.
So how did you, what steps did you take to try to have a curator? You talked about a curator ad litem.
Yes.
To look after the patient's interests.
Attempts were made to communicate with the Department of Health. They were still unresponsive until we filed a court case in December 2015, where we were going to ask the court to stop the discharges as announced by the MEC, and instead we appoint a curator who will then supervise the process of discharging. Because I must add, it was not about us trying to keep a patient under Life Esidimeni no matter what. No, that was not our idea. So it was not to look after the interests of Life Esidimeni. Our idea was to look after the interests of the patients and mental health. We then, I think the court date was set for around 22nd of December.
Did you, before you get there, did you say you attempted to communicate with the Provincial Department of Health? Were you unable to get a meeting?
The meeting was, as per the letter, the meeting was, we never responded to there was never a response to the request, the official request. But at the time, after that letter, without any meeting or any further communication to engage us. And in fact, after I had actually gone to the office of Dr. Manamela, the mental health director, to discuss, I think she was going to do some mental substance abuse meeting in the East End, which she wanted us to participate in. But in that meeting, I also raised the issue of Life Esidimeni once again, but even after raising it there in that meeting, I didn't get a response that they would want to meet SASOP officially to discuss issues related to Life Esidimeni.
Well, before you move away back to the court case, look at 3577. Now, this appears to be a minute of a meeting held on the 21st September 2015. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there appears present on behalf of the Gauteng Department of Mental Health, Hannah Jacobus, Sophie Linkwani, Salome Mashile, Dr. Manamela, from the province, and seemingly your colleagues from SASOP's names are set out there. Rita Tom, Bernard Janssen van Rensburg, and Leslie Robertson. What do you know about this meeting and this minute? Because it has, I'm asking you this, you can anticipate the question, because on 3579, it is a long discussion about Life Esidimeni. And this was just before the MEC announced the termination of the contract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you able to tell us anything about this minute and this meeting, and in particular the discussion on Life Esidimeni?
I won't remember in detail the contents of the discussion, but it was one of those meetings I did not attend, but my colleagues attended, where the issue of Life Esidimeni was raised again.
Is this one of the standing meetings that
It was
you
one
have
of the standing meetings to discuss. If you look at the minutes, we're discussing several other projects. So it was one of the standing meetings where the Life Esidimeni was brought to the meeting once again.
Okay, thank you.
That was September 2015, and then in October 2015, you wrote a letter requesting a meeting. Do I understand that in October 2015, when you wrote that letter, you wished to have a meeting specifically on Life Esidimeni?
Yes, the request for the meeting in October, it was after the MEC had announced that the contract would be terminated. So that meeting with the MEC and the Gauteng Mental Health Directorate would have been, our request was for us to discuss specifically Life Esidimeni.
And then you say in December, after meeting with several partners and after having received no responses, you chose to litigate. Had SASOP ever litigated against the department before?
It's something we would not would really think deeply of doing. We've never directly litigated the Department of Health, especially for public sector issues. I'm putting that because we may have been party to a litigation that is done by a private specialist on a medical aid issue. So I don't say totally. It may have been party in a medical private specialist issue done by leadership in private for a medical aid issue. But to take on government and take them to court on, we've never done that as SASOP.
Yet you felt that you needed to do it now.
Yes, we did. We felt that at that we run out of options of trying to engage the department. So, and we're too worried about what was going to happen to mental health if we do nothing.
And that led to the litigation in December 2015, and the settlement agreement that came, that's already been part of these proceedings we've discussed to some extent, the December 2015 litigation, and that it resulted in a settlement. Can you tell us about that? What was your understanding then of the outcome of that litigation, seeing as it then did not go to court?
In terms of the settlement, it was agreed that SASOP and other stakeholders will engage with Department of Health and will come up with some reasonable process that will be followed on how we're going to discharge, if that is the agreement, the patients at Life Esidimeni. But government would meaningfully engage with SASOP and other stakeholders and will come up with a reasonable plan if the conclusion is that the patients should be discharged. Bearing in mind that a reasonable plan already existed in terms of the national mental health policy framework that would guide us. So that was my understanding of the settlement, and this was supposed to be concluded by 31st of January 2016.
And did those consultations then follow?
When we came back, went for holiday, when we came back in January, the first meeting took place very early on in January. So I did not physically attend that one, but I got feedback from my colleagues who attended that the department, and specifically the head of health, would not have wanted the South African Society of Psychiatrists to be in that meeting, because the half of the board members of the South African Society of Psychiatrists are state employees. Meetings were then scheduled, after that cancelled and rescheduled.
Pause for a second. Why would state employees not be permitted to be part of those consultations, particularly since this was a decision that was being taken by the state? Wouldn't it be important to have the state employees present in the consultations?
It would be better to answer your question quoting the second meeting, because there I was actually physically there, so it's not me being told by my colleagues. So once I heard that, I then attended the second meeting, which was also delayed. I think it was early February. And in the meeting, the head of health was not there, but the person representing the head of health did not want me to be in the meeting.
Who is that?
I can't remember the name, the actual person, but we can go back to the minutes of that meeting. That there was a person representing the head of health who said I shouldn't be there. There was a long discussion, debate, because I was insisting that I should be in the meeting, until the deputy of the head of health, Dr. Libete, is the one who then said, SASOP is similar to SAMA. I should stay in the meeting and engage. SASOP should stay and engage. But SASOP should go to the head of health, who was not in the meeting at that day, and try and have a discussion with him so that we can iron out our differences that will make him not to want us to be in those meetings. I did write an email to the head of health, and I gave the summary of what the meeting had agreed to do, had asked me to do, and if I remember very well, there was never, from the head of health, the response I got was like noted. There was never a response that say, okay, let's meet on this particular day and discuss, these are my differences.
Wasn't there a court order that required that you talk?
Yes, there was a court order. He was deviating from the court order, Justice.
And was SASOP a party, or you were not a party? Were you a party to the litigation in your personal capacity?
On behalf of SASOP.
So SASOP was a party in the December 2015 litigation.
Yes.
So the settlement agreement was concluded between the parties.
Yes, and the settlement agreement, it says that the parties, the stakeholders, must go and engage with the department and any other relevant stakeholder who may be important in the discussions.
And then did they heed your, or were they persuaded by your explanation, apart from the fact that they need not have been because they were under a court-agreed settlement, that you would talk? Were they then further? This is now you telling us February 2016.
Yes. Yeah. After intense debate and discussion and arguing, as I said, that Dr. Libete is the one who intervened and said, from the Department of Health, let me be allowed to stay in the meeting, but I must go and iron out my differences with the head of health. But I must also say that after that meeting, there was never another meeting.
After February 2016,
yes.
Was that early February 2016?
Early, I think 6th of February.
And then, in March 2016, there was further litigation.
Yes, there was never another meeting after that, and we had passed our cut-off date, our deadline that was in the settlement agreement, but we continued to avail ourselves to any kind of engagement. We didn't actually, strictly speaking, on the 31st of January, we should have gone back to court immediately because we were given 10 days after 31st that we should go back to court and bring up our application if the engagement didn't.
Why didn't you go back to court straight away? Meaning, so there were some weeks that passed, a month that passed before you approached the court again. Why didn't you immediately go back to court?
Our attitude towards government is not to fight with government, is to engage with government. We understand the difficulties of providing health and the limitations the government has. So we would not, if the deadline was not too important to us, that we have to, as if someone has stolen something from our house. So we didn't have to, by that day, be agitating, go back to court, because we understand the challenges and we considered ourselves, and we still do even today, as partners. We also understand the delays government usually has. They've got more meetings and more things to do beyond our mental health issues. So we did not think at the time that not concluding the discussions by the 31st of January 2016 was malicious on the part of government. We thought it was the usual government delays. They will not discharge the patients until we've concluded, even if it happens after the deadline that has been set by the court.
So you still took them on good faith at that point?
Yeah, that's correct, Council.
In relation to SASOP's involvement in the consultations, Justice, for the record, and Dr. Talatala, if you could please have regard to file 2, if someone could assist the witness.
And in the first application, your lawyers were Section 27, were they?
That's correct, Justice.
Okay, and page 645 of that file. Yes. These are the minutes of that meeting that you were referring to. And item number 5 of the minutes. Justice, are you there?
I'm not yet there, but I will be there soon. Yes, thank you.
645. Item number 5.
Yes.
It says SASOP involvement. And the minutes confirm, and I'll just read the relevant aspect. In response to objections from the department to SASOP participation in the consultations, Dr. Talatala explained the importance of SASOP's involvement And then it says, as an applicant, a body representing psychiatrists, and a body that sought engagement with the department on the issues since mid-2015. And paragraph 5B says, Dr. Lebete agreed that SASOP should be involved and noted SASOP's expertise could be of assistance. As per the settlement agreement, they couldn't negate the facts that SASOP have a right to be present. That is in meeting of 9 February. That was 9 February.
That's correct.
And then at page 653 of the very same file.
And Dr. Manamela was present, as the minute says, right?
Yes, she was present.
And Mr. Musinoki. But who objected? Then thereafter follows Dr. Richard Lebete. Who didn't want you there?
I cannot remember the actual name, but it was the person chairing the meeting on that day.
Was it a man or a woman?
It was a man.
And Dr. Manamela didn't chair the meeting.
No, she presented in the meeting.
I see. Thank you.
Sorry, it was page 653 was my next reference. Are you there?
Yeah, that's correct.
Justice, are you at page 653?
Mm-hmm. I'm there.
Is this the email that you just referred to earlier in your testimony? The email to the head of the department, Barney Celebano?
That's correct, Counsel.
And can you just tell us what was the import of this email?
As I say, it was on the day, I can see now on the date, sent 9th February 2016. It must have been it was in the evening of the day that we had the meeting. Firstly, because I had been asked by the meeting to actually try and iron out that.
It looks like it was, yes, at night, yes.
Yes, at 20 past 11 p.m.
20 past 11 at night.
Yes. So we had already, I was summarizing what had been, what the meeting had asked me to do, that we should iron out our difference. But I was also trying to show the head of health through the email, even before we meet, the importance why SASOP was part of the settlement agreement and why the parties needed to engage.
Justice, the email is self-explanatory. I don't
Yes. You don't
wish to
have
go
to.
through it.
It is self-explanatory.
And yet you ended up in court again.
Yeah. So in the email also, I was also still asking for the meeting with him. Yes, we did end up in court again because we got to, on some weekend, I think around March, we got to hear that about 50 patients were going to be moved from Life Esidimeni to Takalani. I remember that weekend because I was not even in Johannesburg. So we had to come back, meet our partners so that we could prepare for an urgent application to interdict the government, from the Department of Health, from moving the patients to Takalani.
Why were you concerned about the move of 50 of the users from Life Esidimeni to Takalani?
Well, there's many levels of concern. One, we had not yet settled, we had not yet agreed on the proper way of discharging or transferring the patients from Life Esidimeni to any facility. So that was the first concern. Secondly, the process of transporting or of moving patients is, I would say, it's a scientific process. It's not something. I'm sure even moving people with a taxi who are well from Soweto to town has its own risks, but the stakes are higher.
Let's leave it to the scientific process. I mean, taxi environment may not be the ideal example.
But the process of moving a patient from one area to the next is something we get trained to do. And
Who gets trained to do that?
all health providers, doctors, you get trained at medical school on how
All
should-
doctors, regardless of your
Okay,
specialization.
just moving any
or your-
patient, or in fact, all mental health, all health providers. For instance, it is known that you could cause more harm with a transfer. It could be like if it's an accident scene, it's better to stabilize the patient at the accident scene and not hope that the transfer process will make things better. And also, you need to prepare the facility that's going to receive the accident, because you could transfer the patient to a maternity and its injured patient to a maternity hospital or vice versa. So at the time they were going to move 50 patients, I was of the opinion that they have not made proper planning to move patients from Life to Takalani.
They means the
government.
Gauteng Department of
Gauteng
Health,
Department
yes,
of
the government, yeah.
Yes. Firstly, you would not move 50 patients at once in one day. That would be rather careless, unless you've planned for it over a very prolonged period of time and you've prepared. You can already, if I'm saying that next week I'm going to move 50 patients from facility A to facility B, I can already say that you're going to have errors, because there are errors that happen when you're moving one patient. For instance, the correct documents may not be sent by the facility that's sending patient, or correct forms in the Mental Health Care Act may not be filled. There's proper forms that you need to fill. So there are even little errors that happen anyway when you're moving patients. When you're moving 50, that would be too big. I also know Takalani is a neighbor. I work at Dr. S.K. Matsige Memorial Hospital, and Takalani is a neighbor of our facility. I have been asked by Takalani a few years ago to go and do favors when they've got the problem. The review board is going to close them down because forms are not done. I would go and assist them. So, whilst I have not worked for Takalani, for a long time, but I was aware that they do have limitations, and also they are looking after children with mental disabilities, not after adults. So already, to me, that process raised concerns based on my knowledge of Takalani, on my knowledge of difficulties with transferring patients and the risks associated with transferring patients, irrespective of which patients we are transferring.
So you say Takalani was a home that took care of mentally disabled children, and there would be adults that would now be transferred to Takalani.
Yes.
And what risks would come from that?
Yeah. Throughout this process, we must be aware that some of the things that were being done by the department had never been done before, or had never been done to the scale that the department was going to do. So at each and every step, even if you think about the department that's going to move severely mentally ill patients to go and reside with children, and you're going to move 50 of them, not 2 or 3, and then bring more as the team gets comfortable. Already, that was a problem. So they were going to do, and we're going to advise, if we're allowed, on something that has really never been done before, which is complicated. The risk would be you're probably going to have a clear separation of the adults from the children at the facility. The facility will need to be properly staffed to deal with these mentally ill patients who could pose danger to the children. And the staff itself may not be used to the Life Esidimeni patient to receive them in such a huge number all at once. And they may not have even established what's going to happen when they relapse. Are we going to send them to Lilian Goyi? Are we going to send them to Chrisani Parakwanat? Are we going to have a psychiatrist come to see a patient? So they may not have, my impression at the time was that they have not assessed the risks associated with the move.
And if you move a patient from one facility to another, or you discharge from one into the care of another, who would do the discharge? If the person is being attended to by a medical professional, would it not be required that the doctor sign that discharge?
Even before the signing, if you are going to move a patient from one facility to the other, even if it's at the wish of the funder or the government, but it must be approved by the treating team. So if government or funder is funding a facility to treat those patients, but the ultimate responsibility should be of the treating team. Now, when it comes to mentally ill patients, it is before the doctor even signs, the team must agree, must identify the patient that is going to be transferred, must know where the patient is going to go to, who's going to receive the patient, what level of care is available. So the team must be aware of that. And the doctor, as I've done this at Stekfontein many times, you then get reports from the different team members who have the nurses, the psychologists, the social worker, so that we then as a team put up a proper plan on how we're going to move that patient, whether we're discharging them home or to another facility. Then as the last line is then for the doctor to attach his signature on the Form 3 of the Mental Health Care Act and say we are discharging this patient to this facility and this is the treatment. And so the doctor is the one who ultimately signed, but in consultation with the multidisciplinary team. That is why then it gets very difficult if you're going to do it for 50 patients in one day.
And then assume that all of that happened. Assume that all of those steps you say needed to take place. Ultimately, then with the signature of the doctor, what then happens to the patient? How is the patient transferred physically? How is the patient physically transferred? Who attends to that? The physical conveyance of the patient from one place to another.
Well, if we're talking about this Life Esidimeni, okay, let's make it easy and say we transfer this patient out of Stekfontein to Life Esidimeni. Then Stekfontein Hospital would provide transport to move the patient, and we will decide, is the patient going to be accompanied by a nurse, by a social worker? So Stekfontein Hospital would then provide transport to move the patients to Life Esidimeni. So
would they be required to have a support staff accompany them?
The team that is treating the patient will make that determination. We would decide on what level of support the patients. We have, for instance, the Stekfontein decided that this patient will need to go with a nurse or will have to go with a social worker who will then hand over the patient to wherever the patient is. Or alternatively, the NGO, which used to happen in Stekfontein, would come and pick up the patient, who would meet the people from the NGO, the actual people who are going to move with the patient to the NGO.
And these are mental health patients. So so one is they may need to be accompanied, you say.
Yes.
And how would they be transported?
Firstly, on the fact that they need to be accompanied, it's because some of them may not be able to tell their story when they arrive where they are going. So they may not be able to say, I've got high blood pressure, I am taking captopril or whatever medication. Someone else may need to, in fact, you should have sent the information up front before the patient goes. If you're going to transfer a patient to a facility, you fax all the documents so that the facility that's going to receive reads them, gets comfortable that they're going to be able to deal with this kind of care that's required for this patient, and then says, okay, then bring the patient. The patient will have to go with someone who will also just say, brief the receiving facility on what's happening with the patient, because the patients may not be able to. Also, you also need
finish the sentence, doctor. The patient may not be able to
explain, to tell, to talk about their diagnosis, their treatment.
Thank you.
In addition, there could also be other information that is known by the treating team that may not be documented. You know, the information about living with the patient. You've had this patient for 9 months or a year. She likes sitting in the sun. Please bring her back to in the shade. She could burn herself dehydrated in the sun. Little things like that.
And then once that happens, and assuming all of that happens the way you say it should, is that the end of the story for the discharging side? So you were giving the example of, so it's Sterkfontein and you would discharge into the care of someone else, and this is a procedure and this is how it would happen, and then is that the end of it for you?
If it's done correctly, that would be end of it, unless there was an agreement that the patient should come back should they relapse, which we would. I mean, in the severely ill patients, you don't want them to discharge them from Sterkfontein to an NGO, for instance. And once they relapse at the NGO, you make them to go and start at the bottom again. The NGO must go to the clinic. You don't want that. It's preferable that at least maybe for 3 months, the patient, if the patient relapses, the NGO would take the patient back to Sterkfontein, to my ward, because you don't want them to start the process.
But how would you know? How would they know that they can go back to you in 3 months' time?
That that would be an agreement at the time we're discharging the patient. When you're releasing the patient at Sterkfontein, we have an option to say this patient won't do it for NGOs, but we can say you are well, we are discharging you from Sterkfontein back to your home in Soweto, and when you get sick again, the home in Soweto will take you to a clinic and you'll follow the upward referral system to Baragwanath before you come back to Sterkfontein. But remember, that would be too hard if you already know that the patient is not well enough. You are sending the patient to Life Esidimeni or to NGO. So we would allow that the patients are not actually discharged legally. In sense, their status of admission is not changed from assisted or involuntary outpatient, so that the NGO can bring the patient back. So severely ill patients would actually allow them 2 or 3 times, then afterwards then would say now the patient is fully discharged, and if the patient relapses, then they will have to start the process from the clinics. And
has that happened in your experience, that patients come back after a period of time?
In my experience, yes, it happened all the time. Yes, yeah. Some of the patients, the NGOs won't cope with them, and they'll bring them back to Sterkfontein. Then we'll keep them stabilized, whatever we can stabilize, then send them to Life Esidimeni.
So now you're at Takalani, and you're involved in the litigation. Can you just explain then what your role was, and what did you want when you went to court? What did you want from the government?
If I remember very well, we wanted to interdict the discharge of those patients to Life Esidimeni, to Takalani, until such time we've concluded those discussions about the best way of discharging patients from Life Esidimeni.
Were you present in those proceedings at all in the March 2016?
Yes, I was in the court counsel.
And it was an unsuccessful application?
Yes, it was unsuccessful counsel.
And why do you think it was unsuccessful?
Because the department lied to court. They convinced the judge.
About?
They argued that through their counsel that, firstly, they made an issue about discharge versus placement. They argued that if you are discharged, it means you are well, you should be going home. As I said, that's the layman's understanding of the word discharge. It's not like that in health. So that they argued that. And they argued that those patients were being discharged by doctors. It was not them discharging the patients. And the patients were well enough to be at home, but the patients don't have families to look after them. And therefore they are just being housed at Takalani. They are not really going for further treatment. That was the drift of their argument, which was untrue.
What kind of patients were these that were being transferred, the 50 patients?
They had severe...
What type of what were their disabilities?
Severe I mean, if I have to speak for all Life Esidimeni patients, we are talking about patients with severe mental illness, which is treatment refractory, most of them. That is,
Which is, repeat that phrase.
treatment refractory.
Meaning?
For schizophrenia, it's people you have used the first antipsychotic, you have used the second antipsychotic, in addition to other I'm just limiting myself to the medications. So, but there are other therapies as well. But in terms of medication, you've used the first antipsychotic, you've used the second antipsychotic, it has failed. You then you went to an antipsychotic that is reserved for treatment-resistant patients, which is called clozapine, and you've used it at a good level, therapeutic level, for a prolonged period of time, and the patients still have not responded to treatment. And now you are trying additional medications. In fact, the patient has got poor prognosis in terms of ever responding to the treatment. That is the kind of patients, in terms of kind of patients that they have. There is other group of patients with mental retardation, but the big bulk of the ones that we're going to be discharged are the ones with those kind of severe mental illnesses.
And what would happen if those patients defaulted on their treatment or were not provided with the medication?
Yeah. Whilst I say they have not, they are not well, they have responded to some level. They are contained, but not contained enough to be released to the community, because the substance abuse, in fact, they're going to stop the treatment because they don't have the insight to realize that they need the medication. So if you then stop the medications, they'll actually get worse. They'll actually, their psychiatric condition would deteriorate.
No, you go ahead. I'm listening.
Maybe I thought it was a cue from you.
No.
And would these patients have received that treatment at Takalani?
Sorry, Kasla, I didn't hear the question.
So we were just talking about okay, so let's just go back to the case. You said that you were concerned about moving. We've gone through that it was a large number of people. We've spoken about the manner and the process of discharge. And then the concern about Takalani not being a home for mentally disabled children. But other than the fact that it was a home for mentally disabled children, is there any other reason why they would not be capable of taking care of these patients from Life Esidimeni? And why don't you answer that, and then we'll take it from there.
I think partly because they are looking after children, they would not have the expertise immediately to look after patients, older patients with adult patients with mental illness. I'm not saying that they could not develop it with time, but in a short space of time they would not have. We are also concerned that they may not even know their referral systems. Where are they going to get their medications? When we discharge patients from any of our facilities, the challenge is to make sure that when the patient gets to Heidelberg or Soweto, can still get the same medication they were getting at Chris and Parakwanat, which does not happen all the time. So where they're going to be discharged to Takalani with a month's supply of medications, to have Takalani establish where they're going to get medication for the next month and going forward.
And this type of medication, let's take the example of schizophrenia that we've just been, the provision of antipsychotic medication. Is it something that anybody can do? Can it be left to just a layperson to provide that medication, or does there need to be some level of knowledge of that drug and its side effects or whatever? I don't know.
If they are adequately trained, they could, and it's easier to train a family member or counsel a family member on medication for one patient. But now, when you are having 50, then you need to have a system. So it can no longer be about. So a lay person can look after her son and give the medications, the antipsychotic. But when you're gonna look after 50, then that becomes a system, then you need to have trained people. But not only that, the system must know that we give our medications at this time and this time, and we watch for this side effect. We measure blood pressure so many times a day. We check temperature so many times a day, because now you're not dealing with one patient, and your staff-patient ratio is not going to be such that if it was 1-to-1, then a layperson can pick up that one person is sick. But if it's a system where the staff is going to be less to look after a big number, then you need a health system that will make sure that they can balance the fact that there's no one-to-one supervision of the patient. Like, for instance, if you take any medication, it's easier, maybe relatively easier for a family member to know if their son did not take medications that day. But in the system, then you must then develop, are we going to have mouth checks for all the patients, for instance, after they've taken medications. So it's the people, but also it's the system. You need to develop the system to do that.
Did you say mouth checks?
Yeah, I'm saying like after giving them medication, patients may take the medication and not swallow it, or put it in the mouth and then put in the pocket.
Now, you say that you had some knowledge of Takalani because you'd been there before and because it was a neighbor to the facility where you practice. Are you aware that a large number of people died at Takalani as a result of this transfer from Life Esidimeni?
Afterwards, we've heard that a large number of patients had died. But even before that, I had come across a document about Takalani that also got me worried that people were going to die at Takalani. Because in the document done by the Department of Health, one of the departments of Department of Health, they had typhoid infection, and the patients had been admitted at the Baragwanath Hospital, and then because a typhoid outbreak will cause a health crisis, I think the department had investigated what caused the typhoid infection to those patients. And one of them,
typhoid infection at Takalani.
Yes.
So, Dr. Talatala, if we can just pause there, because it would be of assistance to all of us now if we had reference to that document that you're referring to. It's called ELA 58, and it should be in a file called Exhibits. And then it would be numbered with which exhibits are in it. ELA 58, Justice.
Thank you.
Is this the document that you're referring to?
Yes, Counsel, that's the document I'm talking about.
And when did you... okay, tell us about this document first. What is this document? It's a Gauteng province official document.
Yes, it's an official document compiled by the Johannesburg Health District. From this document, it looks like Christian Baragwanath Hospital admitted a patient with typhoid infection, and that's supposed to be reported because there could be an outbreak of typhoid of where the patient comes from. And the Johannesburg Health District had investigated the source of the typhoid infection because obviously...
well, before we get to the typhoid, it's just to understand the document. It says it's compiled by a person with the surname of Manala Lobsha. We see that at page 4, the end of the document. And the designation of this person is a bunch of letters, EPI/EPR/CDC manager, Johannesburg Health District. Do those letters make any sense to you?
Not immediately. I can't remember what they stand for.
So it's some sort of manager in the Johannesburg Health District that compiled this report. And then it was sent to a range of people: Chief Director, directors, deputy directors, public health specialists, health program managers. Do you know why a document like this would be sent to so many categories of people within the provincial health department?
Oh, because if it would be sent to a lot of people, and probably it should actually become a public document, because to have a typhoid infection in the province would be, a typhoid epidemic would be a crisis. And
is it a notifiable condition?
I think it is a notifiable condition.
Why would it become a crisis?
Because it could get a lot of people sick, it could spread fast, and it also reflects on the kind of hygiene that we have. We may have to look for the source of the infection, because it could spread in the community and cause the typhoid infection. And typhoid infection could kill people.
And
can kill people.
Can kill people. And this is dated 19 July 2016. And the document refers specifically to Salmonella typhoid. And then it describes, in the second paragraph, it describes what Salmonella typhoid is. And it seems, in the first paragraph, it talks about contaminated food or water. And then paragraph 3, I'm not going to go through all of it. It's there and self-explanatory. But one important thing it says is that Salmonella typhoid is treated with antibiotics and infection prevention and control precautions. What would infection prevention and control precautions entail?
Yeah. It's an infection. You don't want your defense to treat the infection with antibiotics. Your first defense is to actually prevent the infection. And we know how the infection spread is through poor hygiene. If the bacteria finds itself to food or to water, contaminates food or water, then it can spread amongst people who have the infection and who then consume unhygienic water or food. So the first would be, in fact, that's why then we would want the whole community to be aware if there's such an infection, so that we can prevent the infection and not rely on treating it with the antibiotics.
But you need to prevent it from spreading.
From spreading, yes. You can contain it. You can contain the infection in the community with good hygiene, good water, washing of hands, good hygienic preparation of food.
So what is important about this is what you were referring to. You raised this letter. You said there was this letter and it was related to Takalani. And it says in paragraph 3, case background. On 18 July 2016, a conjoined investigation was conducted by Johannesburg Health District Outbreak Team at Takalani Home for the Mentally Disabled, following a receipt of a notification from Chris Hani Baragunath Academic Hospital. So the outbreak was traced back to Takalani. I just want you to help us to understand this.
Yes, that's correct. At the second half of the document, they trace it back to, given the history of the first patient, who is a former Life Esidimeni patient, they traced it back to Takalani. And I think there's two other cases that were suspected, but not yet, not confirmed at the time the document was written.
Should we cut to the chase, Council? You've read the document. It is an exhibit. And the environment assessment is that's the real issue.
One issue before we sure, one issue before we get to the environmental assessment, Justice, and that's just to note that one of the names, one of the suspected patients of Salmonella typhoid in this document is a Johanna Tladi. And she is one of the deceased that's represented, whose family is represented in this hearing.
Yes.
And we don't need to go there right now, but for the record and for your notes, the affidavit of the family member related to Johanna Tladi is to be found on page 4025 of the bundles.
Yes.
I've forgotten what volume. I don't have the volume number. I think it is volume 11, but it's page 4025 is the affidavit, and the death certificate is to be found at page 4030. We can now get to the environmental assessment. Dr. Talatala, on page 3 of this document, there's a section that's headed environmental assessment, and then it describes the environment. Can you take us through this environment? Can you read from the document and tell us exactly what this assessment found at Takalani?
They start with the sleeping area. They say there were 6 patients who shared a room. There was not enough personal space. And hand washing basins were not provided. And that's important because where you keep patients, whether it's a ward, you need to have, like if you go to any ward, you find a hand washing basin. That is to prevent infections from spreading. In the dining hall area, there was a foul smell. The floor and walls were clean. Even there was no hand washing basin, soap, and hand paper towels for the patients to utilize before eating. So that's also important because when the patients are going to the dining area, especially with the mentally ill, the nurse in charge or whoever's in charge needs to instruct them to wash their hands before eating and also wash their hands after eating.
The dining hall should have a nice smell that possibly whets your appetite. Here the dining hall has got a horrible smell.
That's correct, Justice.
Yeah, anyway, you go ahead, Doctor.
The kitchen, they say, very dirty floor, poor illumination, some light bulbs were missing. The illumination may sound like a small thing, but it's important because as you are preparing the food, you need to actually see what you're preparing the food. If you cut you need to make sure that utensils are clean. Remember, as you are preparing the food, you can move. You don't want to move meat with vegetables and move bacteria between different types of food. So you need good illumination. There was very poor housekeeping. Dishwashing water was being reused. It was not drained after use. Soap for hand washing and hand paper towels were not provided. Very dirty hand washing basin. Hot water was not provided. So those are the
consistent with your observations at Takalani when you had been there, or had you not been to these areas?
I must be honest that when you go to assist a facility, you don't go as an inspector. You don't go with the hat of an inspector of being critical. So I did not go to them. Even at the time I saw, I would be unhappy, but I would not tick the problems as they've done because you wouldn't be going as an inspector. Yeah.
But can you describe what you saw? I mean, did you go into the sleeping area, for example? They say 6 patients share a room. Would
not be.
Would that be normal? And how big would these rooms be?
I would not have that information. As I say, I would have gone to just assist them with a problem. They would have put me in an office to sign certain documents, and I would have left. So I would not have the environment, how it is in my own personal experience. But the report describes it well.
But the time you visited is quite different from the time when there was an outbreak of typhoid there, and severely mentally disabled patients, adults were brought in there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct, Justice. At the time, that's many years ago, and it was not at the time where they were going to look after the mentally ill patients.
When they were looking after young people, yes. Okay. So you would know this, you'd gather this from the report yourself.
That's correct, Justice.
Very well.
Do you know anything about the symptoms of salmonella typhoid?
They are described here. It's not my area of expertise, and I've not treated those patients in a long time. But the descriptions listed in written in the document are correct.
I want to return, because this is the first big move. This is when the big move started. So this was the first NGO that received patients from Life Esidimeni. In the beginning of your testimony, when we were looking at your letter of 22nd June 2015, you said that you spoke about established NGOs. Was Takalani one of those?
It would be, Council, one of the established NGOs, but remember, Takalani was to look after children, so we would not have sent patients to them anyway.
At the time you wrote the letter, did you think that there would be patients sent to Takalani?
I would not have thought that they would send patients to Takalani, unless Takalani were to change.
And had you known that they were going to send patients to Takalani earlier, I mean, you made your concerns known when you had to go back to court in March 2016. But had you known about it earlier, would that have been of concern to you, and why?
It would have been a concern, as I say, unless Takalani had changed, had evolved. It would have been concern because it's not designed to look after adult patients. Also, Takalani has had issues even before. I mean, I think we've heard that even the department itself had once investigated Takalani, I think around 2010, and had found problems with Takalani. We are aware that even at the time the patients were being moved to Takalani, there was a strike by the people working at Takalani. Those will be additional problems, in addition to the fact that in any event, even if it was performing at its optimum, it was not designed to look after the mentally ill patients.
So at the time you wrote the letter initially saying, whoa, this is a problem, there are potential consequences, it was on the assumption that there would be established licensed NGOs that you were familiar with, and that was enough to raise a concern.
That's correct, Council.
Are you aware that patients were then moved to unlicensed NGOs? In fact, to houses?
Yes. We later learned, Council, that the patients were being moved. After Takalani, we later learned that the patients were being moved to houses. We got reports that patients were being put in garages and all kinds of places, not the usual NGOs.
Why do you think that the MEC ignored you? The head of department ignored you. The head of mental health care ignored you. The project leader, Mr. Musunohi, ignored you. Why do you think all of them did?
I think that
you wrote, you raised it at meetings, you attended the meeting after the first case. They tried to keep you out of the meeting until Dr. Liberta says you may come in. You go to court twice. They promise the court that they will talk to you and consult. They don't. And go ahead. Why do you think they ignored you? You're president of an organization that represents many, many psychiatrists. Why did they ignore you?
I think, Justice, there are multiple reasons. The first one probably being that the Department of Health had made up its mind, Gauteng Department of Health, that's going to close that facility, and it would not listen to the professionals. And they have a culture of not listening to the professionals. I'm going to give you two examples to elicit that, which is part of the issues discussed in those meetings.
Professionals, you mean clinicians like yourselves? Yes.
Clinicians
Very well.
like yourselves,
Yes.
Something that may be minor. The Gauteng Department of Health does not allow children under the age of 16 to be admitted as voluntary patients in their licensing. We've brought this to their attention. I'm saying it's minor because no one has died from it. We've brought it to their attention. In fact, we've gone and looked at all the laws that govern admission. They will not allow voluntary admission. That means that if you are less than 16 and you've got a mental illness, you need someone else to consent for you, because you can only be admitted as an assisted patient, even in private sector. We brought this to their attention. We've put it together. We've taken it to National Department of Health. Even today, if you go to Dr. S.K. Matsige Hospital and you are less than 16, you won't be admitted because the Department of Health doesn't want you, wants you to consent to that admission. So now, I cannot explain why would the department...
Yeah, you're at a point of saying they have a culture of not listening. Yeah. Could you just develop that point without an example? Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So now, with that example, I cannot figure out why would they not listen to us and not listen to the law that we have provided them with. It's difficult to find the answer. When it comes to this case, the head of health had presented to us before this process started, before 2015, in one of our subgroup, our Gauteng psychiatrist meeting, and had said in the meeting that the province was going to do away with, don't say service providers, where they outsource work to other party, and they had. And he gave examples like they done away with the cell phones, and the Life Esidimeni patients were gonna be their next target. Today,
well, I'm looking for a very direct answer of your understanding of why all of these luminaries in the health, provincial health apparatus would be written to, not once, a good few times, by your organization of psychiatrists. And you would go to court not once, but twice. And they nonetheless go ahead and move people in large numbers, 1,712 people, contrary to all the advice from clinicians specialized in the field.
Just as they don't listen to professionals, probably they thought we are colluding with Life Esidimeni, and they wanted to end the contract with Life Esidimeni no matter what.
Did you understand why they wanted to end the contract with Life Esidimeni?
Well, because they never said it to us. We can only conclude that they want, firstly it's a contractor, it's not within the government.
No, but did they give you reason to understand why they wanted to close down Life Esidimeni?
The reasons
I'm asking from your observations of their conduct and responses, summarized in your mind. What would you say is the reason why they would, despite all this warning, proceed and shut down Life Esidimeni?
The reasons they gave, as they are in the letter of the MEC, are not in keeping with their actions, their policies. So the reasons given, in my view, are not the real reasons.
What are the real reasons?
In my view, I think they wanted to do away with Life Esidimeni. I think at another level, they also wanted to create a crisis, an infrastructure crisis, because after the process had started, then the Gauteng Department of Health issued a document the way they're going to build 300 beds at Vescopis, 300 beds at Tara Hospital, and 300 beds at Stikfontein Hospital to accommodate Life Esidimeni patients, which was a deviation from the policy.
Institutionalization, surely that's not consistent with deinstitutionalization.
That's why I'm saying that the reasons they gave are not in keeping with their actions. So the building 900 beds at tertiary psychiatric facilities is a deviation to the policy, is a deviation to decentralization. So I can only conclude that they wanted to create an infrastructure crisis. Patients are discharged, then we have to find beds for them, and it's easy to build them at Stekfontein, Vescopis, and Tara, rather than building facilities in the community.
Why? Why would they do that? Why would they want to create an infrastructure crisis?
If the government wants to spend, I can only
if the government wants to
spend in an easier way. It's easier to build 300 beds at Stekfontein.
Spend or save money? Spend.
Spend money. Sorry. So if they wanted to, in my view, is that I cannot find any other reason why government would want to build 900 psychiatric beds in tertiary facilities when we've got a plan that says we must build community-based facilities, except to have a big infrastructure spending. That is easy to do, because if you're going to build small facilities in different, it take many years. It's much more difficult. It is easier to build 300 beds at Stekfontein Hospital, even though it's a deviation from the policy.
Did you ask any of the officials, why are you doing this? Did anybody, one-on-one with you directly, give any reason?
Council, except for what we have from the MS's the media statement, we never got any.
I'm talking about directly one-on-one with you, not the official statements. Or did you personally speak to any of the officials and ask them, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?
We asked, but we wouldn't get the answer why they were discharging patients. I've never asked them further why they want to, at the time why they want to build those 900 beds. At the time that letter was released.
Let's ask you a related question. Why do you think the decision makers did not care?
Probably
the other side of the same question. You warned that there might be severe consequences, including death, and death happens in a large scale. So the question is, why do you think they did not care? Or why didn't they care, you think?
Probably they don't care about mentally ill patients, especially patients of that severity. And I do not think that is the first time that patients have been discharged and consequences have happened. I think the department did not anticipate the level of involvement of professionals to highlight this, because in my view, if the Society of Psychiatrists had kept quiet, these deaths would not have been highlighted, because they would have been swept under the carpet. And so it was the first time that the society also put an effort to document, to engage, to deal with this institutionalization.
Which inevitably gets me to the next question, which is, why did you and the society care? My first question was, why did they not care? Now, my next question is, why did you and the society care?
Justice is a long answer. I think partly is the history of our country. Where at the time I was the president, we felt that we could not repeat what had been done by the medical profession in the past, and collude with the government or keep quiet when the government was going to attack the human rights of patients. So we took a conscious decision that this time we will be part of the process, will evaluate the process, so that we do not collude, especially with the government, if human rights are going to be affected. Especially because at the time we thought that this would have human rights consequences. I think there are also other factors that just happened by chance. The fact that I had looked after these patients over many years made me to have a better insight than other psychiatrists. And also the fact that I was the president of the society and I was working in the private sector, I was not scared of my employment being affected by the society standing up against government, because there was a lot of discussion within society on whether we should take this up or not, and we knew that it will have negative consequences to the society, and also negative consequences. It could have negative consequences to the society as well as to the individual practitioners in their line of employment.
You mean public sector
The public sector employees.
Do you know, they're members of this, I mean, even the addressees on your two letters, they include medical doctors. And they were responsible for the implementation of this program. How, as a psychiatrist, as somebody who understands mental health the system, having practiced in it for a long time, and mental health care users, is there not an ethical obligation on the doctors who were part of the implementation of this project to refuse to do this?
There is an ethical obligation for both the doctors at Life Esidimeni and some of the colleagues within the department they should have refused ethically, but working in within the Department of Health, I mean, I'm talking now for the Life Esidimeni patients, working in health is difficult in the sense that it is not only this incident that where doctors are put in a difficult position to choose whether to discharge or not to discharge, to treat or not to treat. One quick example, we don't have acute beds for adolescents. So a psychiatrist in an acute facility is put by government in a position where if you've got an aggressive 14-year-old, you either say, we don't have a facility for that, you go home. Or you admit the patient and mix them with adults. That's what we have in Gauteng, that's what we have in the country. So whilst those doctors have an ethical obligation to look after that 14-year-old, but they're in a very difficult position because whether they discharge the patient or they admit to adults.
But let's take this example. We don't need to reach for an analogy because we've got an example here of doctors who discharged patients or were part of the project of taking patients out of an environment where they were stable and receiving an adequate level of care and placing them in a house with someone who's never ever had any experience in looking after mental health care users. So that example, what obligation is there on the medical professional in that process?
I think they should have refused. At the time we were fighting, I was hoping that they would refuse to sign the discharges so that the department could do it itself. So I think they had an ethical obligation to refuse.
Would you have refused?
Absolutely. I would have refused. Especially because the department...
What if you were employed by the government and your job depended on it?
I would have refused. Sorry, I'm going to give you another example. During the last public sector strike, in the last big one where the doctors and nurses went on strike, I was still working at Stekfontein Hospital. And the mental health directorate, I was going there on twice a week. And there's a specific patient that I returned, that the patient should not be discharged because of my assessment to the team. And I returned it with my own handwriting. But the mental health directorate came to my ward and discharged the patient. Even today, I still don't know who actually signed because any patient discharged in my ward should have been my signature to the patient. And the patient was assaulted and died. So it was not the first time. I would have refused because it would not have been the first time where I think the department is overreaching in the area of professionals.
Because the Hippocratic Oath requires of you to refuse to succumb to pressure that would endanger the right of proper access to health care by your patient, isn't it so?
That's correct, Justice.
The whole core of the Hippocratic Oath is exactly that. Isn't it so, Doc?
That's correct.
And
Justice.
when it is breached, when politicians give professionals, clinicians, unlawful orders, you know, don't you? Clinicians are not bound to implement unlawful orders,
That's correct, Justice.
such as discharge somebody to their potential death, when it is not your professional opinion to do so.
That is correct, Justice.
And the world is replete with examples, isn't it? Where executives and other people in power would order doctors to do things, and doctors do them, and so much goes wrong.
That is correct, Justice.
And that's how Steve Biko died, isn't it?
It is correct, Justice.
Doctors acted against their oath, and that helped and precipitated his death.
That is correct, Justice.
So just on that line, on the same topic, can you just explain to us whether we're talking about ethical obligations, and I think you've answered quite clearly, but the obligation that rests on a medical on a doctor that stems from the Hippocratic Oath into the modern version of the ethical code, whatever that is, you'd know better than me, that now applies. Is it to take action to protect people, as well as the concept of doing no harm? Is that a correct understanding?
Yes.
Of the basis of that oath is that you will do no harm.
That is correct, Counsel.
So even if you didn't take active steps to, as you did, to write and litigate and all of that to try to stop it, at the very least one would not participate in that process as a doctor under the concept of doing no harm. Is that a correct understanding?
If the doctors appreciate their ethical obligations, they should not have participated in the discharge.
Dr. Talatala, thank you for making time. There's still a ways to go with your testimony. But from my side, I'm wrapping up. Is there anything that you would like to add that you did not have an opportunity to say?
No, that's all, Counsel. Thanks.
Justice, that's all for me for now for evidence in chief.
Yes. I'm going to run to 5 p.m., so we're going to do some work until then, unless I'm outvoted in some way. And this is a lawful order, it's not an unlawful order. And no ethical crisis either. Advocate Krause?
Thank you, Justice. Doctor, we represent the patients that have survived the Marathon Project and their families. I'm just wanting to ask you some questions concerning the issue. You wrote to, in the first letter that we dealt with, you wrote to the Department of Correctional Services. Why is that?
Both correctional services and justice are the ones who also they also look after the patients, because if the patients were discharged to home and they relapsed, they could get sick and be involved in crime, whether if crime is inflicted on them or they commit crime to someone else. They could end up in the streets, and they will then, and it's a known fact that mentally ill people then, where there's no proper care, they end up with cases and in prisons. Already, justice and correctional services were already, as I said earlier, they're already in trouble because they cannot send patients for observation. They cannot. They are keeping patients who should be in the facilities.
So what you're saying to us is there's a domino effect, and the domino effect goes far. It goes right into the prisons itself.
That's correct, Council. It was going to go to the families. It was going to go to the ultimately to the prisons and the justice system.
I know that last month there was some statistics. I don't have it with me, but in October this year, I brought an urgent application to get a mentally ill child out of prison. And at that stage in Port Elizabeth, the time for mentally ill state patients awaiting a bed was 22 months. Do you agree with that?
That is possible, and it's not just Port Elizabeth, it's the entire country. I may not have the actual dates, the actual time, but it's long for including our province, long for most provinces.
Yes, that was the stats that was given to the Eastern Cape legislator, that it would take
22 months.
22 months. So I understand your concern there, and I think it's a valid concern.
But I thought that you wrote also to the Justice and Corrections because of the forensic delays, that there was an increasing waiting list of people detained who were to be assessed for criminal responsibility.
That's correct, Justice. We wrote on that because the reason there's a waiting period is because there's no beds at Stekfontein. So now, if you close some beds, instead of in fact, our efforts are the other way around. We should be actually looking for more beds so that we can reduce the number of people who are waiting trial prisoners who are waiting for observations. So that's another reason why we wrote to the Department of Justice.
And Doctor, if I could then just add on to that, for a mentally ill person to wait for a bed in a correctional facility with hardened criminals awaiting trial, there's a lot of bad things that can happen there. Do you agree?
Yes, Council, we know our prisons, and that has got multiple levels. Firstly, this could be a person who's not even mentally ill, but it has been brought to the court that he could be mentally ill. So we're not clearing him as health facility so that the trial could go on. So he's waiting. Maybe he has not even committed the crime. So it's unfair to the person because we're denying him of a trial that should happen on time. We're delaying it by 22 months. They could be well. But the second part to it is that someone can be ill already. So we are actually delaying assessment and referral for proper treatment. It goes further. Once the court has said, you are a state patient, go for treatment, we further keep that patient in prison, even though the judges and the courts have said the person must go to Stekfontein. Because of lack of beds, we still keep those patients in prison throughout the whole country until such time there's a bed to treat them. So in a situation like that where beds are such a crisis and human rights of patients are affected, we should not be thinking of closing beds. We should be thinking of opening beds.
Thank you, Doctor. One of the questions that I really wanted to get you to answer is why the Life Esidimeni centers has been closed, and you have answered some of it already, but I'm not so sure that I understand the creation of an infrastructure crisis. Just explain that to me, please.
It's my reading of it. And I'm making those conclusions because we've got a policy that says we should not be building beds at Stekfontein, Weskopis, and Tara. We should be building in the community. The department says, I'm closing Life Esidimeni because we want to push the patients to the community. A few months later, then they say we're going to build 900 beds in those facilities. So it can't be the deinstitutionalization and the need to treat patients closer to their communities. I can only say it's the need to build. And easier way to build would be to build at Stekfontein, Vescopis, and Tara Hospital.
Can you assist us when it was said that 900 beds would be added?
I'll have to find my date, Council. I can't find it immediately, but I could.
I'm quite sure you're still going to be here tomorrow,
Yes,
Doctor. If I can perhaps ask you
later,
again tomorrow.
Later, after the patients were discharged.
Thank you. Doctor, I want to thank you for the way you explained to us how a transfer should happen. I think we've got clarity on that now. The Umbud said to us that a transfer, even the knowledge of a transfer can stress a mental health patient. That could cause him stress. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Council. I've only discussed the transfer on the system side.
Yes, I understand that. Yes.
I didn't even touch on the patients and family side. Any change in the environment affects us all, and it's worse with people who are vulnerable, mentally ill people. So a transfer would have to be managed differently, not differently, but there should be some work done with the patients to prepare them for a transfer. Unless, of course, you are transferring a very acutely ill patient with behavioral, we have no choice. We have no choice but to move rapidly.
And multiple transfers, what effect would that have on a patient, a mental health care user?
I think from my point of view, the consequences will be from the system failures, because the system would struggle to fail multiple transfer, and then that will have consequences as we've had in this case, that in this Life Esidimeni project.
How will that manifest in a patient?
Well, the obvious one is that the patients would, because the system won't be ready for them, the patients would relapse. The patients would relapse in terms of the mental illness that they have. But most patients that are having psychiatric problems, especially at that level, they do not only have psychiatric problems, they also have diabetes and high blood pressure due to many reasons. So then there's also a risk of relapse of their other medical conditions, because one, the medication could be forgotten. Two, if they were on a diabetic diet provided by a certain provider in a certain environment, when they go to the different facility, they may even not want to eat or eat differently. So there's a lot of personal stuff that is therapeutic that could change if the patients are moved rapidly without proper preparation.
Okay. I understand that if you relapse in terms of the other medical condition like diabetes, that could cause your death. You agree with that?
That's correct, Council.
But if it doesn't cause your death, what effect will a relapse on ordinary chronic medical condition be on the mental health of a patient?
Depending on the illness, the relapse of the medical condition or poor control of it has an adverse effect on the psychiatric condition. So it could actually worsen the prognosis of the psychiatric conditions. The psychiatric conditions and other general health conditions, especially diabetes, high blood pressure and heart disease, they are quite interlinked. One makes the other worse. If you need to control both.
Yes. That makes sense to a layperson, but what would the effect be, for instance, if a heart condition or high blood pressure is not treated, how will that affect the relapse of the mental health patient? Will his symptoms become worse? How will it manifest?
Well, if there's a relapse of the medical condition, at worst it can actually bring an additional psychiatric condition to the person who's already having
so you could have a new illness.
Additionally, for instance, the patients who are already having a dementia, and then the diabetes is poorly controlled, then they have they'll then get delirium. Then we'll say they've got delirium superimposed on dementia, which carries a poor prognosis in terms of life.
Yes.
They could that combination could actually kill the patient. So it could give us an additional condition to a psychiatric condition to someone who's already having a psychiatric condition. And at the time they are sick, and with the movement and send them to hospital, the psychiatric medication could easily be forgotten or not taken, which could even worsen the original psychiatric condition.
Is that would be my next question. If you send a whole lot of mental health care users without proper identification to a person, to a non-clinician, how would they know what medicine to give, and what effect would that have in getting the wrong medication or no medication?
Well, you need to have a system. I'm sure established NGOs will have a system that will make sure that they are prepared, they've got times for taking medications, then they know how to identify the patients. But if patients are going to come unidentified, even to an advanced psychiatric facility, there will be mistakes, because one won't know the diagnosis of which patients, and you may not know which medications to give to which patient. And we may end up starting, even if they came to my unit, if I don't know who's taking what, then I'm going to have to go back and make the diagnosis afresh, which takes time. To make a psychiatric diagnosis I'm not going to just do a blood sugar and get it. So it takes time. My intervention, if I don't know you from before, I can't go full-blown 5 medications that you're on or 3 medications that you're on. I'll probably start afresh as if I'm seeing you for the first time and start slowly. So you are likely to then relapse, even in an established facility.
But that is an expert medical practitioner dealing with a situation. What in a situation where there are no medical personnel?
If I were them, I would not even take the patients, or I would have passed them to a medical facility, because I would not know which patient is getting which medication. So I would not then keep them.
So what you're saying to us, it's totally unreasonable if there's not somebody that can properly identify and properly medicate a mental health care user.
Absolutely. Council, remember that under normal circumstances, if I at Stekfontein send a patient to an NGO, and for some reason I forgot to send the document, the NGO will return the patient immediately to Stekfontein, because they will not know what to do with the patient. In fact, that will be frowned upon. I'm not saying that error doesn't happen, but that will be frowned upon that I actually sent a patient to an NGO with no documentation at all, just with a pack of medications, even if I sent just one patient.
And you say that will be the reasonable thing to do?
It would have been the reasonable thing to do, to either return the patients back to where they were coming from, or to send them to a medical facility that could look after the patient and help them sift through the medications and figure out what's going on.
So the fact that the patients weren't returned to Life Esidimeni is an indication that there weren't reasonable personnel at the NGOs?
I don't know there are reasons. I don't know there are reasons why they would have patients that they don't know who's having what medications, and they still keep those patients under their care. Even a family member, I would not. If the family member didn't know that which medication to give, they should go back to the clinic.
Yes. We have heard evidence of a child that looked for a mother and the wrong mother was brought. It had the mother's name on, but it wasn't her mother. Those things can also happen, I suppose.
Counsel, there's little things that happen.
I don't remember about mothers and medication, Counsel.
I will refer the court to it. I have it.
Or no, the evidence in this case.
In this case.
Oh.
Yes.
We have talked about mothers and...
No, the daughter went to fetch the mother,
Oh, I
to
see.
go to the mother, yes.
Okay.
There's little things, counsel, that we take for granted in a hospital environment, like armband as a tag, so that you know which patients
Yes.
you are dealing with. I suspect that in that situation, the basic identification of patients was not done, or it was taken for granted.
And you would expect the basic medicine to be recorded on a patient's file in such circumstances as well.
The first is the identity of the patient.
Yes.
If you are sending one, it's easy. You don't need an armband. You can go with a person. But if you're going to transport a big group, you probably need to give them some armbands so that they are identified, so that you can link the patient to the file. And in the file, there should be the diagnosis and the medications of the patients with the actual dosages of medications and some risk factors, things the new facility needs to watch for.
Yes. Doctor, if a patient were not to receive sufficient water or food, what effect would that have on his medical or mental health condition?
I mean, with the water, they could go into dehydration. And dehydration is a risk for all of us. We could die from dehydration. But some of the patients could be on medications like lithium. Lithium is a drug that is very sensitive to the amount of water your body has to be. So you need to hydrate well, not hydrate too much and not to underhydrate and get dehydrated. So if those were on lithium are at risk of going to lithium toxicity if they are dehydrated. But there's all other complications of dehydration that would affect any of us. Similarly with food.
Before we move on to the food, could you, I'm sorry to put this to you, but give us the symptoms. What would a person experience with a shortage of water? Or
Well, firstly, the first one, they'll feel thirsty. If they can appreciate that, they'll feel thirsty. They could feel dizzy as the blood pressure falls because they are dehydrated. They could end up collapse, have seizures, and die. And if they are on lithium, that process could even be more complicated because the lithium levels in the blood, as the fluids go down, the lithium levels is going to rise.
The concentration rises.
Concentration of lithium in the blood, and lithium is toxic at certain levels in the blood.
So you would die from the medication.
You could die if you're on lithium. You could die from lithium itself, but dehydration itself kills.
And if the lithium concentrations are too high, what symptoms are there?
Well, the patients will feel sick, could feel...
what do you mean sick?
They feel unwell, generally unwell, but the worst scenario, they could go into seizures from the lithium, get confused, more confused than their illness. In fact, from the layman's point of view, they could think that the patient is actually getting more sick from the psychiatric condition. But when you listen to the patient as a psychiatrist, you realize that this is confusion related to a medical problem, lithium that's going up in the blood. So they could get confused, they could end up with fits, seizures, and eventually die.
And food, doctor?
It's just similar to dehydration. Food, if people don't eat, even if they don't have the mental illness, they are likely to, they will have the complications of not eating, which is the blood sugar going down and eventually you dying from the blood sugar. But with psychiatric patients, at the beginning, if they are not getting enough food, before they even get complications of the food, because the medication increases the appetite, the patients are going to be restless in your ward if there's not adequate provision of food, because they've got an increased appetite, a craving for food from the medications. So and then you will think that maybe their psychiatric illness is getting worse, and yet they actually do want food. And then as the blood glucose go down, they could also go into delirium, confusion. And you may, as a layperson, think that even a junior doctor may think that maybe they are getting mentally ill, and yet it's the confusion due to hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar.
Well,
I see that you've taken some water, Justice.
yeah, I am highly hydrated, doctor. What you should be telling us is the risk of drinking 3 jars a day, which I do very often. It's 5 o'clock, and we're going to counsel. Is it appropriate time to?
Thank you, Justice. I have some questions.
I'm sure you would have more. And tomorrow you might tell us, Doc, what is the risk of overhydrating? I'll be anxious to hear that tomorrow. I have been for 5 weeks. Anything from counsel before we adjourn? Doctor, we're going to start tomorrow at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and we request that you be here present then, so to continue the evidence. You're going to be asked questions by 3-4 more advocates, so it's quite a way to go. You still have, and re-examined by the advocate who introduced your evidence. Very well, thank you. We are adjourned.
Can I leave like that? The stuff. Okay, thank you.
Very informative. I think your testimony has been very informative. It's been like a mental.
You're putting me on the spot.
Like what happened? What should have happened to me?